You are setting in a very interesting spot as secular humanists. I'm going to ask you the same question about belief. What is it in secular?
Belief, I certainly agree with what George has said about belief there, and particularly the first part where there are many different ways of looking at it, and one of the things that we've sort of touched on is we cannot know everything individually. We all realize that. As we grow up, we learn to accept the views of our parents, and as we get older, we frequently challenge them. But some feel we cannot get away from the fact that we have to just take a lot on authority, on reliable witness. I visited a friend, a family where they have two 7-year-old twin boys, and in the kitchen, the mother has a sign, a very nice little sign that says, "Because I said so." That sort of sums it up. It's like there's a certain point where you have to depend on authority. But that's not to say that it is a desirable thing never to question authority. I think those that try to make people get into a situation where there are authorities that are recognized and are never questioned is a bad thing. And I think the philosophers in all religious traditions have been against, by and large, although there are exceptions in every tradition, just believing something because I said so. To believe something, you have to get your arms around it. You must understand it. You must come to grips with it. You have to see how it applies in particular situations in your own life. And I think from the standpoint of a secular humanist, we try to evaluate different things. Perhaps we'd like to think at maybe a greater extent than some in a more restricted tradition would examine them. But I think that often that's a bit of hubris on our part.
There are people who say that knowledge implies belief. Is there a necessary distinction between belief and knowledge? I'll go back to Don.
Well, the old belief, another way of characterizing it is belief is opinion. This is sort of the way Plato probably would have been comfortable in the dialogues with Socrates. Belief is opinion. I want to get, everyone has an opinion, and we sit around the marketplace and talk about opinion, but what is truth? And in the Socratic method, the dialectic, basically people give their opinion, and Socrates inevitably is has a lot of human skills. Oh, that's a wonderful answer, but I'm bothered about this. What about that? And he will not accept an answer. I mean, he says, I am the wisest man in Athens because I know I don't know. And please tell me, you obviously understand this better than I do. Explain it to me. And of course, it's kind of manipulated. What Plato does in the dialogues is Socrates moves along, and it moves in a certain way. And if you're not inclined to go with Plato that way, you're sort of, well, wait a minute, Socrates. I don't think that was a good answer, and you've defeated your enemy too easily here.
Interesting. I asked Dr. Ahmadian the same question. Is there a necessary distinction between belief and knowledge?
Well, of course, these things depend on how you define the terms, and I think this is an area where you're going to find a lot of disagreement in the history of the discussion of what these terms mean. But for me, I think the most useful definitions are ones that do make a distinction. I think it's certainly possible to believe something that you don't know. But I also think it's possible to know something you don't believe. And that may seem counterintuitive, but bear with me. For me, belief and action are inextricably mixed. We will proceed on our beliefs, whereas we may or may not proceed on our knowledge. There's an anecdote that's too long to tell, a parable about this, but the bottom line is this. If you believe that faith can move a mountain, then you may be motivated to do an act that if you didn't believe it, you would not do. Now, you may know that faith moves a mountain. You may have studied, the philosophical arguments and the religious texts, and you're saying, as a matter of knowledge, you give me a test on this question, I will give the right answer. Can a mustard seed of faith move a mountain? The answer is yes. I get 100% on the test. But when I go out and I'm confronted by danger,
the mountain,
I may turn around and run the other way, all right? So that I know it, but I don't believe it. So now, of course, but you'll find many people who will argue to the contrary.
George, you have the same question. Is it a necessary distinction?
Well, you know, I try to put it into context as a philosopher, emeritus, as it turns out. But one of the concerns that there is in philosophy about the future of philosophy, and it's articulated well by Searle in an article precisely on the future of philosophy. And he says that we've become, in modern times, so concerned about knowledge and so concerned about the fact that there might not be adequate knowledge or correct knowledge or knowledge at all, that what happens in philosophy is that they often take a question and then turn it into themselves. Do we know? But not what is it? Not what is the good thing, but do we know? So it traps philosophers in this issue of knowing whether they know, how they know, etc., and keeps them from moving ahead. So he says the ancient skeptics, they had all of their problems about how the rabbit and the hare the rabbit and the turtle got to the finish line, etc. But they recognized those problems, but it didn't stop them. It didn't stop them from thinking and knowing and proceeding. And he says that's what we need to know, or need to do. We need, as philosophers, to recognize that there are these issues about knowledge, but we must not then stop thinking about the life that we live, the engagement, and because that's where we get our experience, that's where we get our correctives, and that's where we find the meaning of our knowledge. So that's why I sometimes fear a little bit that we overdo in modern times the issues of knowledge and not enough the engagement in the world.
George, would it be too simplistic or within our conversation to ask the part of faith in this challenge of knowledge?
Yeah. If
reality is going to dictate to us.
Right. Well, belief and faith come very close together, and there's some great sayings to believe in order to know. That is, if we're growing up in a family and we don't have confidence in our colleagues or in our parents because I said it. You know, if we don't have that kind of confidence, then our process of processing our experiences then is damaged and restricted. So a proper interrelationship with others and their experiences and their knowledge, etc., allows us to grow. So that belief becomes a context for a development of knowledge in that sense.
Excellent answer. I want to ask this. The following question is that there are some interesting things about truth and how truth relates to all this. For an idea to count as knowledge, some people say it must actually be true. The question is, what are the criteria of truth? And maybe we'll start with this with Dr. Maladine.
The criteria for truth?
Yes, the criteria for truth.
Well, I think here, I can't give the answer to that question. Truth is something we accept as a state of reality, that a particular fact is either true or false. And the next question you come to is the epistemological question. Well, how do you know whether a given fact is true or false? And the answer to that question is complicated. There are different answers. The answer that I adhere to is the one that was first articulated clearly by Al-Ghazali, which is that you need to use 3 different methods of ascertaining knowledge, and that these 3 methods have to confirm one another. Those 3 methods are reason, experience, and transmission from reliable sources, which was mentioned before by George.